All right, so you guys have sent in a ton of messages about this whole young Philly situation.
Yeah, it's definitely got people talking.
For sure, for sure. So let's just dive right in. We're talking UK rapper, huge on social media, right?
Hmm.
Millions of followers, and now he's facing some serious charges in Australia.
It's a lot more than your average celebrity scandal, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Ah,
This thing goes deep. Social media's role in the courtroom, how international law comes into play, it's wild.
and it brings up all these questions about fame, influence, and how we think about justice in the digital age.
Exactly. For anyone who hasn't been glued to their screens, can you give us a rundown of what exactly landed young Philly in trouble down under?
Well, the allegations themselves are very serious. He's facing charges of sexual assault, and this all stems from an alleged incident with a woman in his hotel room in Perth.
And just to be clear, this happened right after one of his gigs,
That's right.
adding yet another layer to this whole thing. And we're not talking about just one accusation here. It's 4 counts of sexual penetration without consent, 3 counts of assault causing bodily harm, and on top of all that, a charge of impeding a person's breathing. It seems like they're really throwing the book at him, aren't they?
It does seem that way. And I think one of the things that makes this so compelling from a legal perspective is the sheer specificity of those charges.
Yeah.
This isn't just a case of he said, she said. The prosecution has actually presented photos,
Oh, wow.
which they claim show evidence of non-consensual acts. And not only that, they're pointing to these as evidence of a pattern of violent behavior.
Wow. And they've even gone so far as to say that no ordinary person can consent in those circumstances.
Exactly.
That's a pretty strong statement. It sounds like they're really trying to build a solid case. And then you add in the whole social media aspect. And we're talking about a guy with millions of followers across the board,
Yeah.
YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. So how does that play into everything? What went down at the bail hearing?
That's a really important point because the prosecution actually argued that young Philly's online presence, his influencer status, if you will, makes him a flight risk.
Really?
Think about it. He doesn't have deep ties to Australia. He makes a significant amount of money through social media, and he's got this massive platform that, let's be honest, could potentially be used to influence witnesses. So they were concerned that he might,
Skip town.
exactly, before facing trial.
Okay, that makes sense. So the prosecution was basically saying, look, he doesn't have strong ties here. He could easily disappear. What did they want to happen?
Well, they pushed for him to be remanded in custody, arguing that regular bail conditions just wouldn't cut it in this particular case. They were concerned about his reach. You know how things can go viral online in a heartbeat?
Oh, tell me about it.
Especially when you've got a celebrity involved. People pick sides quickly, often without all the facts.
Yeah, it's like a whole other court of public opinion happening online.
Absolutely, and that's what they were worried about,
Mhm.
his power imbalance and how it could potentially influence the case.
Okay, so I get that. But at the same time, don't we believe that everyone should be treated equally under the law? I mean, your follower count shouldn't determine how you're treated in a court of law, right? How did the defense respond to that?
Well, the defense argued that, yes, while his online presence is significant, that shouldn't mean he's treated any differently under the law.
Mm.
They emphasized that being held at Hakia prison, which is, by all accounts, extremely restrictive.
23-hour lockdown, right?
Yeah, 23-hour lockdown. They argued that it was essentially inhumane. They also made the point that a large portion of his income is generated through social media.
Which is true.
Yeah, so a complete ban on him accessing and using social media would be unreasonable and incredibly difficult to enforce. They were basically advocating for his right to continue to work, despite the seriousness of the allegations against him.
And you know what? You're right. It is his livelihood. It's not like flipping a switch, especially when you're talking about that level of income.
Exactly.
Okay, so the judge had a real dilemma on his hands. On the one side, you've got the prosecution worried about this guy using his platform to influence the case. And I mean, let's be real.
Right.
We've seen that happen before. Social media can become this whole other courtroom
Oh, absolutely.
where everyone's a juror. And the facts are, well, let's just say they get a little blurry.
Yeah, it's the Wild West out there.
So on one hand, they're worried about that. But on the other, the defense is saying, hold on, a total social media ban? That's a bit extreme. And honestly, how would you even enforce something like that in this day and age?
Right. It's not like they could just lock him out of the internet. It's just not realistic.
So where did the judge land on all of this? What was the verdict? What were the conditions for bail?
So young Philly was granted bail, but with some pretty strict conditions.
Okay.
He has to stay put in Western Australia, report to the police every single day.
Wow, every day.
And he had to put up a $100,000 cash surety.
$100,000.
That's right. And while they didn't completely ban him from social media, he's prohibited from contacting the alleged victim
Understandably so.
and from posting about the case online.
Okay, so they're trying to walk this line between letting him work and making sure he can't use his platform to sway public opinion or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, for sure. But speaking of that whole online world, this idea of a power imbalance comes up a lot, especially when you're dealing with celebrities. What does that actually mean in this situation?
Well, you've got to remember that young Philly, he's got this enormous platform, right? A really dedicated fan base.
Oh, yeah.
And anything he says, even something seemingly harmless, could be taken by those fans as a, sort of call to action.
Or even worse, a way to discredit the alleged victim.
Exactly.
It's scary how much weight a single post can carry.
And that's precisely where that power imbalance comes in. The prosecution is essentially arguing that young Philly, just by being who he is, could potentially intimidate witnesses, or even the alleged victim, make them afraid to speak out, share their side of the story.
Because they're worried about the backlash from his fans.
Exactly. And it's a really tricky issue, no easy answers.
It really makes you think differently about the whole influencer thing, doesn't it? Because on one hand, you have this incredible ability to connect with people, build a community, make a living. It's amazing. But on the other hand, there's this huge responsibility that comes with that, a responsibility that maybe not everyone is ready for or even understands.
It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure. And I think this case really shines a light on the need for a bigger conversation about ethics in the online world, especially when you're talking about something as serious as a legal case. How do we balance that right to free speech with behaving responsibly online, especially in these high-stakes situations?
Because it's not just about likes and retweets anymore, right?
Right.
These are real-life consequences we're talking about.
Exactly.
But before we go too far down that road, let's get back to the heart of the matter here. We've talked a lot about young Philly's side of things, but there's another person at the center of all of this. It's true. It's easy to get caught up in the celebrity of it all, the headlines, the social media frenzy, all of that.
Right.
But we can't forget that at the heart of this, there are some incredibly serious accusations being made.
Absolutely.
A woman has accused young Philly of sexual assault. And we need to remember that her story matters just as much as any legal strategy or social media debate.
100%. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. These are accusations that the legal system is taking incredibly seriously, and for good reason.
Yeah.
This isn't just about what people are saying online. We're talking about real-life consequences here.
Right, and from what we've seen, the police seem to be building a pretty strong case. They've presented evidence, photos even, that they say support her claims, and they're describing it as a history of violent acts.
It's not something they're taking lightly at all. I mean, the prosecution was very clear about what they were presenting, saying no ordinary person can consent in those circumstances. They're definitely drawing a line in the sand there.
Wow, that's a powerful statement for sure. So it seems like their case hinges on this concept of consent, or rather, the lack of it.
Right.
But there's still a legal process that has to play out here, right? I mean, young Philly is innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. And that's a really, really important principle of our justice system. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution. They have to convince a jury that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
So for those of us who didn't go to law school, what does burden of proof actually mean in this situation? What do they have to prove?
So basically it means that the prosecution has to present enough evidence, enough compelling evidence, to convince the jury that he actually committed these crimes.
Okay.
And it can't just kind of point in that direction. It has to be strong enough to remove any reasonable doubt.
Right. So even though he's out on bail, this is far from over.
Oh, absolutely not. This is going to be a long and complicated process, I'm sure.
Especially with a case of this magnitude.
Exactly. And let's not forget that added layer of social media.
Right, because this whole thing feels like a crash course in how the justice system is trying to navigate this digital age we're living in.
It really is. We're having to confront these really uncomfortable questions about how much weight we give online influence versus, the whole idea of due process.
It's a tough one.
How do we even ensure a fair trial when you've got all this noise, the constant news cycle, things going viral left and right?
It's a lot, and it's easy to get lost in it all. But I think the most important thing to remember is that beyond the headlines, beyond the legal arguments, even beyond all the social media chatter, there are real people whose lives are deeply affected by what's happening here.
I couldn't agree more. It's a good reminder that as we follow this case, as we talk about it,
Mm.
we need to do it with sensitivity, with a critical eye. We've really got to make sure we're getting our information from reliable sources.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hmm.
Well, this deep dive has been quite the ride. Definitely a lot to think about. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap things up?
I think just as things progress, it's crucial to pay attention not just to what's being said, but who's saying it.
Mm.
What's their angle, and how is the information you're taking in actually shaping your own views? Stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to question everything.
That's advice we can all use. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
My pleasure. Always enjoy it.